All right. Thank you all for coming to this session, Ethics Across the Disciplines, with our faculty panel of experts at Petersheim. In this session, just to make sure you're in the right place, faculty experts from a variety of disciplines come together to discuss ethical considerations within their own disciplines and the possibility of commonalities across different kinds of ethics and ethics in research. I'm very grateful. We have a wonderful panel. And to welcome all of our participants, I'd now like to turn it over to Dr. Jonathan Farina, Professor of English and Interim Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education and Assessment. Jonathan.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everybody for joining us today for a really important panel on ethics across the disciplines. When Brian asked me to introduce this panel, he kind of quipped that I could just put in a little something on Jane Austen because Jane Austen turns up as the novelist at every conference because she's the only one anyone's read when they're at ethics conferences. And to be sure, Austen's got plenty of instances, plenty of case studies per se, of moments where the novels talk about everyday ethics. Typically, whether it's appropriate to marry for money or whether it's appropriate to marry not for money and just for love and family or other considerations, whether it's appropriate to tell a white lie. Anthony Trollope's an even better example of that. His novels are 800 pages worth of case studies about minor moral dilemmas that impact us all every day. But frankly, the way that morality is plotted or thematized in fictions doesn't really interest me at all. However much I love both Austen and Trollope and many other novelists. I'm convinced that reading a novel physically improves a reader's cognitive abilities and their capacity for empathy, as well as for reading social situations and character. But I don't actually believe reading novels makes anyone more ethical than people who don't read novels, at least judging by my colleagues. But more interesting to me, as a scholar of literature, is that fiction is, of course, a species of lying. It is made up, and therefore it begs the more interesting ethical question, as far as I'm concerned, of whether representation and misrepresentation, or fantasy and exaggeration, one person's pretend, or a whole genre made up of conventional pretensions, can be considered a form of truth, or is fiction all a complete lie, and therefore is the study of fiction unethical. In a delightful 1881 essay on the decay of lying, Oscar Wilde complains that the modern novelist either falls into careless habits of accuracy or takes to frequenting the society of the aged and the well-informed. Both things, he says, are equally fatal to his imagination, as indeed they would be fatal to the imagination of anybody. And in a short time, he develops a morbid and unhealthy faculty of truth-telling, begins to verify all statements made in his presence, has no hesitation in contradicting people who are much younger than himself, and often ends by writing novels which are so like life that no one can possibly believe in their probability. Wilde is being facetious for sure in his lament about our monstrous worship of facts, as he calls it, but his point is that fictional pretensions to truthiness might obscure the unique form of knowledge produced by fiction in the first place. So the central epistemological and ethical question of literary study for me is not the various ethical case studies thematized by this or that novel, or this or that poem, or this or that play, but the ethical question of the art form itself, whether truth is only a product of the stories we tell, the fictions we create, in painting or in prose, in numbers or in notes, about what is real and what is good. If fictions are believable and true, which are incredible and false? Which do we trust and which do we be skeptical about? My own scholarship investigates the stylistic signatures and generic features that writers have used to register the ethics of their fictions, the kind of lying that somehow gets at the truth. I look forward to hearing today about the central ethical claims that preoccupy the work of my colleagues in other disciplines, and I thank you all once again for participating in this conversation, which is fundamental to our work as an institution that both produces knowledge and then tells stories about it to our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think you've set us up well for the conversation. And now I'd like to turn the mic over to Father Colin Kay, Vice President for Mission and Ministry, to help us get in the correct mindset for this conversation with a prayerful reflection.
Thank you, Bryan, and Jonathan, thank you for your good words. In the beginning, Genesis, God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let there be a dome." God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered." God said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation." God said, "Let there be lights in the dome." God said, "Let the water teem." God said, "Let the earth bring forth." God said, "Let us make human beings." Brothers and sisters, we believe in a God who speaks. We believe in a God who speaks. And not only speaks, but speaks to us, to you, and to me. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. God blessed them, and God said to them. From the very beginning, God is speaking to us. We, at least as an institution, we believe in more than a mind behind matter. We believe in more than a brain that built all this. We believe that it's personal. We believe in a God who speaks to persons, to you and to me. Speaks to us and through us. We believe in a God who cares about who we are and what we are doing, how we are choosing to live, and how we are choosing to live together on this good earth. Join me for a moment, please, in a little bit of silence, a little bit of stillness, as we seek to open ourselves to the God who speaks this morning to us through our disciplines and through one another. Lord, open us. Open our eyes and our ears. Open our minds and our hearts to hear you speaking in us, through us, and all around us. This hour, this day, and always, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Grateful for you all.
Many thanks, Father Colin. And I think we have sort of a tandem perfect opening and prayerful reflection. So as speakers who aspire to truth, let us now open our faculty panel properly. And I'd like to welcome and grill with a couple of good questions first. John Buschman. Dr. Buschman is Associate Professor for Research and Innovation and also Dean of the University Libraries. John, thanks so much for being with us. Let's start off. How do members of your discipline approach ethics in the practice of their profession? What's going on in ethics in libraries?
All right. Thank you, Bryan. Thanks for inviting me. I, of course, have to follow John Farina and Father Colin, so not an enviable task. The term intellectual freedom has never formally been defined by the American Library Association. Nevertheless, it stands at the core of our ethical commitments to, quote, the right of every individual to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. It is expressed through landmark policies, and I'm going to use the multiple there, policies, like the Library Bill of Rights, which states that materials should not be excluded because of the origin, background, or views of those creating them, that we should provide materials and information presenting all points of view, challenge censorship, and cooperate in resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. The profession's code of ethics, in turn, quote, upholds the principles of intellectual freedom and protects the right to privacy and confidentiality with respect to information sought or received. Underlying these is the argument that these policies and practices are essential to the health and functioning of democracy. There's an awful lot packed in there, an awful lot packed into that very simple statement. And reality isn't, of course, this tidy, but the basics of this three-legged sort of policy and ethics stool have not been really seriously challenged in, let's say, the last 90 years. So I'll go to your second question, which is, what is the most pressing ethical issue facing members of my field? It is now by far fake news. There's full stop. I use the term fake news as a generic, like Kleenex or Xerox. The variants of fake news, misinformation, fakes, lies, etc., and the motivations for them, whether political, greed, revenge, etc., don't really get at the broad pattern and meaning of fake news. Fake news is, as I define it in my work, systematically distorted communication. That's a term from Jürgen Habermas, the political philosopher. Cycling back to the ethics outlined above, the assumption is that seeing information in adequate context is the key to the clash of ideas in democratic decision-making, democratic argumentation. That falls apart now because you can now pick your context. One can seamlessly move from a tweet to an article, to another article, to YouTube footage, to a speech, to the web, and to social media commentary, enabling informational paths that resonate versus making sense-making. It creates what one scholar has called parasocial connections to information sources. Two people, this is the result, can look at the exact same thing, but it comes to each from different paths with different surrounding inflections. This ecosystem allows fake news to filter up. Some media outlets that just had a prominent host be let go have been more willing to exploit fake news by saying, some people are saying, forming a feedback loop, validating the fake news itself because it gets aired at a higher level, reported as news that people are saying it. This produces a surrounding sociology to fake news, driving fact-free politics, denial-empowered forces, situations open to what has been called moral entrepreneurs who assert a worldview based on fake news of a hollowed-out, unsightly, and barren landscape devoid of familiar points, isolated by the fear of causing microaggressions, and producing a broad range of anti-equality politics. Many of the most significant things have occurred in the last 5 years have happened because of digital communication of fake news. The assumption of librarians about free access to any and all information or viewpoints and the benefits of that for democracy are each and all in question as a result. Is there an ethical right to bad or harmful information? We simply don't know. This is a fundamental challenge. Forget my own profession. It's a fundamental challenge to democratic societies. Thank you.
John, thank you. Such a helpful opening description of the problems with fake news, and you sort of set me up to perfectly segue to Madison Krall, assistant professor of communication. So Madison, thanks so much for being with us. Similar set of questions. What do members in your discipline, how do they approach ethics? What are they thinking about in ethics? And if you can round that out to the most pressing ethical issue facing folks in communication, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that. And thank you to those who've already spoken. I really appreciate being able to follow up Dean Buschman with your commentary, because one of the ethical considerations that I think is facing my field, and I'll get to it in a moment, is misinformation, and then specifically disinformation, and the troubling nature of that, and what it means in particular for public scholarship, and how we need to reassess our value of public scholarship in the academy, because I think it is vital right now that we are doing what we can as communication scholars to try to mitigate the disinformation and misinformation that we're starting to hear, particularly as it applies to science and health, which are the two areas that most of my work traditionally falls in. But to answer the first particular question, when thinking about the questions that were posed, which was something that I hadn't had an opportunity to necessarily consider in quite a while, even though I am constantly thinking about ethics, particularly as it applies to the courses that I'm teaching this semester. So I'm teaching communication research methods and health communication and social responsibility. So I would say for most people in my discipline, and again, I can't speak for everyone, but for me in particular, it's thinking about research ethics. That's how most of us come into conversations about ethics, is how could I ensure that my research is ethical and then credible? Because oftentimes what happens is that credibility is undermined by researchers who are behaving unethically. And so spending time thinking about what are ethical behaviors, how we ensure that they're mandated, because we know that they're required for the research process to actually work. So in addition to that process, that methodology, it's also important for a lot of comm scholars to ensure that their theory building is ethical as well. And so we spend a lot of time talking about subjectivity and objectivity in the research methodological approach, but I think one of the predominant foci for a lot of scholars in communication is preservation of our research, and ensuring that when we engage in interviews or in focus groups, when we're working with participants, for instance, which I do a lot of qualitative interviewing, it's making sure that we're considering privacy protection, for instance, which could be a whole other topic area that we consider in today's day and age, where ethical considerations are, of course, extremely important. But to answer your first question, I think it's first and foremost thinking about, are we being transparent in our research process? Are we being scrupulous in following stated procedures? Are we avoiding errors, which sounds so simple, but it's inherent that we are going to be making errors in our research. And are we doing everything necessary to try to avoid those? And then again, are we reporting appropriate conclusions and interpretations? I'm a rhetorician, and so this is also vitally important to the considerations that I have for my research. And then again, and this is going to be bleeding into the second question that you posed for us about the utmost considerations that we have today, researchers must not plagiarize. And we are having lots of conversations in the academy about ChatGPT. And so I'm going to lend myself into answering the second question, which I really appreciated, because I had three predominant things that I wanted to speak to, and so I'll do so briefly because it was too difficult to just identify one. So I think that the first primary ethical consideration that's really plaguing or forcing communication scholars to be more thoughtful about their work is stemming from something that happened 3 to 5 years ago, and it falls under the hashtag of communication so white. So inclusion and access is a huge issue in the field of communication, and basically we have to acknowledge that racial inequalities and colonial legacies that are grounded in white supremacy are still inhibiting our field from being inclusionary. And so a lot of the work that a lot of folks are doing, hopefully, again, I can't speak for my entire discipline, but for communication scholars, it's what are we still doing to prevent progress from being made? And I think it's slow, but ultimately is a prime focus, particularly when it comes to right and wrong. But again, non-white scholars continue to be underrepresented in communication. The second thing that I wanted to kind of forefront is we're having conversations about labor exploitation within the field. And this, I think, applies to a lot of conversations in the academy that are happening outside of communication. So I wanted to identify that. But how do we prioritize our students when tuition costs are sometimes prioritized placed in institutions where we want to ensure, that we're doing our best to set our students up for success, and yet they're spending $100,000 to get a degree, and often they can't find a job. So not only talking about the implications of that, but also adjunct faculty, junior faculty, lecturers who aren't getting paid a living wage. So what does it look like when we are losing excellent scholars and quality individuals because we haven't found a way to ensure that they can survive in these particular spaces? And then finally, the third thing is ChatGPT, because I know it's kind of become one of those conversations that we can't get around, but AI is a huge conversation that's starting to set us up to wrestle with some things as they apply in particular to ethics. So I have a couple of comments for the third question about organizational ethics, everyday ethics. The title that I originally presented to you were Everyday Encounters with Ethics. And I think some of these areas set us up to have those conversations, but I know we have lots of other great folks to hear from, and I look forward to continued conversation.
Madison, thank you so much. I mean, a tour de force of the big ethical issues facing folks in communication, and you're a lucky moderator on a panel if each panelist perfectly sets you up to segue to the next, and your reflections on research just tie in so well with our next presenter. So I'm going to turn things over to Sulie Chang, who is professor in the Department of Biological Sciences and director of the Institute of Neuroimmune Pharmacology. Sulie, thank you so much for being here. Same set of questions. So tell us, how do members in your discipline approach and think about ethical issues in the discipline, and what's the most pressing issue that's facing biological scientists?
Okay, thank you. I don't think I'm going to use my PowerPoint now. Okay, so in my field, I was called a biomedical scientist. Ethic actually has been set as a training. We call it responsible conduct of research. And beginning probably about 25 years ago, federal, particularly NIH, National Science Foundation come later. NIH require anyone received the funding must have ongoing responsible conduct research training of themselves, of their mentee. Okay, so the training that referring to that scientist is should be responsible, have a responsibility towards the mentorship, the people who work with the mentor mentee, should towards the collaboration, should have responsibility towards their publication, their product, should have a responsibility towards the study subject, that including animal, including human subject, should have take responsibility for the, I mentioned collaboration, and should have responsibility towards the society. So the one here is the one I mentioned, ongoing training. That means we need to constantly talk about ethics. It's not just taking a course. And however, scientists, it's easy to say, okay, we take a course, we are done. And then after the take course, get the A, then forget about that. So they become that we had to have ongoing training. So for example, my laboratory, every summer, we must have lecture exercise. And then the student who did not do this, complete this training, they will not return to the lab. So, but then talking about study subject that in addition to the test tube, in addition to the cell culture, that typical, the subject, the study subject for the biomedical sciences is animal subject, also human subject. Animal subject that institute actually being a federal mandate have something called Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. That means this committee actually govern the scientists, provide the direction, advices of what they need to do. Just share a little bit. The animal in my laboratory, they live in a very ideal condition, control condition, 68 degree, constantly air condition, and then the humidity needs to be controlled. And the other subject is a human subject that the scientists, long time way back to World War I, that scientists start using the human subject for research to understand, but then that one is very, very unethical. So throughout all this year, particularly United States, that have the federal mandate called Institute Review Board that really review any study that you want to use a human subject. Without this, it would become a federal offense. Okay, so then the one that's responsible to working with people. We talk about the mentor-mentee, we work together, but then the mentor should have responsibility towards how the mentee move on, how the mentee really has towards how the mentor. Remember, Seton Hall, this academic position, we say share, honor, and unite. Actually, it's in with this. And then also collaborative research, how the collaboration interact with the different group, how they share the news. In my philosophy, I always respect the PI. So for my mentee, I say that you do not reach out to any other mentee in the other group unless you go through the principal investigator, myself, and then the PI of that group. So make it we have the rule say do this way so you avoid a lot of problem. And the one that would have a competing interests, the one so-called conflict of interest, COI. In some biomedical sciences, define all kinds of things considered a COI. Okay, so for example, some personal, professional argument that can be considered COI, family or the directly related considered COI, you cannot review their paper, you cannot review their grant proposal, that kind of things. Then scientists must be responsible towards their product. Okay, how do we responsible for the product? Buschman already mentioned about the scientific record keeping, how we save the data, how we keep the data. Sometimes the misconduct, actually, in my opinion, scientists actually intentionally, not intentionally, produce something not correct or not true or false product, false presentation. Then particularly, let's use animal study. When the animal was not handled in the ideal condition, and then they are put into a very bad condition, and then scientists use those animals, produce data, we would not trust that data. That is the unintentionally, well, maybe they didn't poor train it, so that kind of things. And then also about the authorship and peer review. When we publish data, we publish it. I say we, yeah, actually true, that we publish data support our hypothesis. So it's not support our hypothesis, put aside. What if not dump in the trash, we just at least put aside. Recently, I have experienced that we trust that the statistically significant p-value less than 0.05 is the data we publish. But then later, when we start using a different approach to analyze the same set of the gene expression changes, then the insight or the interpretation of that data actually is much more making sense. So scientists actually have we ground that, okay, that's the p-value statistics significance, and then we ground ourselves and we dump a lot of information of that, and that is the one I constantly thinking about. So I tend to tell my students, negative result probably more important than the positive result you get. That's probably direct where to go. Yeah. Okay, and then intellectual property research data that we had to be responsible for that, and then good scientists, good community, and good society that we really want to be. You have to take to be responsible for what you produce towards how you use the data or publish data to lead the society. So this is, I think, the field that, and towards your second question, what's the most pressure? Since I think it's very similar to what has been taught, fake news, fake data, fabrication. As I say that sometimes I give the benefit of doubt unintentionally, or maybe poor training, use the poorly treated animal, produce some data which is not supposed to use for the publish for data, that kind of thing. I would say the falsification probably the worst situation. And also the other thing is the one I say that the emphasis on ongoing responsible conduct training, ongoing training of responsible conduct research. It's a must. However, way back even 25 years, even by today, the course I share with Bryan is biology 7227. That is only in science in magnetic hall. Only the molecular bioscience PhD program is mandatory take the course. And none of the graduate student in the scientist is required. They probably even don't want to talk about that, about what is RCR.
Right.
So I think this is the most serious problem, that all the problem we are responsible towards so many things, but they don't have training.
Sulie, thank you. I really appreciate, and a wonderful follow-up to Madison's sort of comments and thoughts, and how those in biomedical sciences through IRBs and other sort of very strict regulations have sought to protect folks. And again, for everyone, we can see, right, similarities, maybe I'm tipping my hand, but we can see similarities in ethical concerns that just face human beings emerging across these disciplines. So I want to turn to our final panelist, my colleague in SHIMS, LaMar Bolden, who is Associate Professor of in the Department of Occupational Therapy and Chair of the SHIMS Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Social Justice Steering Committee. LaMar, thanks so much for being here. Help us think through how OTs behave and act ethically, and what's the big ethical issue facing OTs.
Yes, I will. And just one correction, I'm an assistant professor. Don't want to take credit where it's not due. So good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. First, I would like to start by defining occupational therapy practice. So according to AOTA Model Practice Act, the practice of occupational therapy means the therapeutic use of everyday life occupations with persons, groups, or populations to support occupational performance and participation. Occupational therapy practice includes clinical reasoning and professional judgment to evaluate, analyze, and diagnose occupational challenges to provide occupation-based interventions to address them. Occupational therapy services include habilitation, rehabilitation, and the promotion of physical and mental health and wellness for clients with all levels of ability-related needs. So in a room full of occupational therapy practitioners, this definition makes complete sense. A historic and contemporary challenge for the profession is how we are defined by those outside of the room. So the disconnect comes from the term occupation, which in the United States has a well-adopted primary meaning, work, right? So in my field, occupations are various kinds of life activities in which individuals, groups, or populations engage, including activities of daily living, instrumental activities of daily living, rest and sleep, education, work, play, leisure, and social participation. So basically, occupations are how one decides to occupy their life daily. So within our profession, the profession of occupational therapy is guided by 7 core values. They are altruism, equality, freedom, justice, dignity, truth, and prudence. From those core values, we have 6 principles that guide our ethical decision-making. They are beneficence, which the occupational therapy personnel shall demonstrate a concern for the well-being and safety of persons. Non-malfeasance, where we shall refrain from actions that cause harm. Autonomy, respect the right of the person to self-determination, privacy, confidentiality, and consent. Justice, occupational therapy personnel shall promote equity, inclusion, and objectivity in the provision of occupational therapy services. Veracity, occupational therapy personnel shall provide comprehensive, accurate, and objective information representing the profession. And lastly, fidelity, that we shall treat clients, persons, groups, or populations, colleagues, and other professionals with respect, fairness, discretion, and integrity. From those 6 principles, we have standards of conduct that are actually enforceable professional behaviors that are listed out in our code of conduct. In terms of occupational therapy's experience, occupational therapists experience moral distress stemming from ethical tensions. Ethical tensions are defined as ethical uncertainty, not knowing whether or not they're making the right decision, ethical dilemmas where two situations pose ambiguous terms that neither feels really good to them, and then also ethical distress where there's actions that are set forth by social systems that don't align to the core values to the profession or the person. So the published research in this area reflects the point of view of systems outside of the United States. The sources of ethical tensions experienced by OTPs are cited as compromised values of professional autonomy, human dignity, and social justice, conflicting interests between resources and systemic limitations, as well as practice management and professional standards of conduct. These ethical tensions can also be further described as conflicting and competing allegiances between our respect for clients' autonomy and safety concerns. So if you have a client who wants to remain independent and wants to continue to drive, you want to respect their autonomy, but you also have to respect society that them driving does not just they have a right to risk their own safety, but not the safety of others. So those type of ethical dilemmas therapists face often, competing values between therapists and clients, as well as competing interests of the professional associations and regulatory mandates. In the United States, there's less published research, but in terms of just, and this might fall under the fake news category, but at least from digital media and looking on and searching for reliable sources and a couple of less reliable like Reddit. If you read what people are posting socially in the United States about occupational therapy practice, very similarly, OTPs working in social systems within the United States experience ethical tensions. The medical model of health and well-being competes and conflicts with the core values of occupational therapists who are trained in holistic, top-down theories that guide reasoning and decision-making. Operating in an impairment-driven medical model conflicts and competes with allegiances to our occupation-based professional identity. In the United States, occupational therapy practitioners report experience distress over conflicts of management of resources and valuing client-centered care, billing, documentation, and caseload management. So systems are enforcing a certain productivity rate that does not allow you to maintain your veracity and fidelity in terms of billing and documentation. So therapists are often noted to either advocate or do covert practices to manage these ethical situations. They also report a sense of belonging, having a conflict with a sense of belonging within healthcare professions and with reductionistic attitudes of other disciplines. Lastly, a lot of therapists are reporting that they believe that they know more than they can actually do for people because of their hands being tied by the systems with which we're in. So the last thing that I'll say, I guess, will lead us into our Bryan's last question is ethics. I believe that ethics crosses discipline when there is a mismatch between values and the institutions that perpetuate and uphold systems that intentionally or unintentionally harm one group of people to the benefit of the other.
LaMar, thank you. I mean, what a tour de force. I've said this already. I mean, the way the panel has come together has been so interesting, and I'm sure our audience feels the same way. The challenges of moral distress and sort of really bringing the big theoretical and philosophical questions that we hit on earlier, connecting into the practical questions. And so I think you're right, and you've teased us all up perfectly. For whether ethics actually spans across disciplines. And LaMar, you've sort of set us up in a nice way. I want to turn next to Madison, Professor Krall. Given some of the comments that you raised both around social justice and sort of starting to get into what you thought was the answer to that third question, jump in on and follow up on what LaMar has shared, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this comes back to one of the points, and thank you, Sulie and LaMar, for your comments as well. I suppose I want to answer your question with a question, which is, when was the last time any of you spent time talking about ethics with your colleagues?
This is always the danger of bringing a great communication professor in, right? The tables get turned and you get questions in your direction. I mean, that's what I do for a living, so my answer will be a lot. But yeah, let's jump around the group. Great question, Madison. John, Sulie, what are your thoughts? How often? Yeah, we'll start with John and then jump to Sulie. How often do you have conversations with other folks, either in libraries or folks looking, leaders at institutions looking for innovation about ethics?
Surprisingly often. I mean, given the second hat that I wear as an associate provost, we are always talking about creating the sort of dual and competing conditions of being able to have intramural exchange amongst ourselves without creating a kind of public issue, but still being open and transparent with our campus here. And in the university libraries, we are constantly looking both at where we draw the line in terms of helping students, how much we parachute in and steer and guide in terms of their inquiry, and also something as mundane as copyright. That we really can't do the kind of steering we want to do unless we model that behavior institutionally and how we handle the collections and the discourse that we're supposed to curate.
Thanks, John. I only understood in the past couple of years how much ethics goes on in libraries and also in innovation. Our COVID ethics series, of course, is only possible because of the work of the librarians, and we've had wonderful librarians on it. I mean, just the wealth of ethical dilemmas and challenges. It's been a wonderful conversation. So I hear that. I want to turn now to Sulie. Sulie, for biomedical scientists in general, how often do you all get together and talk ethics?
I believe what I can say is the within the discipline, as I say that we have the so-called responsible conduct research training. Within my group, we try to talk ongoing. So it's ongoing is the topic. However, with my colleague in the department, outside department in Minority Hall, I have to say 0. And then I actually, the course I developed, BIOL 7227, that was chosen to be the mandatory course when molecular bioscience program was implemented. We say that must be implemented, the courses, because it's really because I'm the one responsible for implemented program. And from my own training, we were in 1999, we were being taught that you need to have ongoing responsible conduct research training. So I put that in the course. And then, however, that time we don't have approval courses until 2009. I went take a sabbatical leave, just study for this subject and come back to offer the course. And it's surprised to me that the department actually does not really realize that need a special training to have this kind of course being taught. It was randomly just given to one colleague, never really taught these courses in just current semester. So that's why encouraging me to reach out to you that I would like to talk at this section, because I would like to reach out to the community to call attention on this is how important this subject is. And then I'm very glad that you give me this opportunity so we can talk. And I also learn from different disciplines that with this, I actually noticed Cost is in the audience. I reached out to him, said, could possible that we have the other science program taking these courses, 7227. I'm not advertising myself because the course I have like a 12 to 13 topic about using human subject. I never taught that, teach that course, give that lecture myself. I always invite outside speaker because I do not use a human subject for my research. I do not think I'm qualified to talk about that. So that kind of things. And then when we talk about pattern, I actually reach out to people expert to teach us with this. So it's a very, in biomedical sciences, it's very critical to have this training because the biomedical scientists produce a product, influence the society. And they need to know that they are responsible for this kind of product, society, that kind of things. So talking to them in my discipline at Seton Hall, I had to say limited, very, very limited, if not none.
Sulie, thank you. So, I mean, this has just been a wonderful sort of set of ideas and modalities engaging ethics across different disciplines. And Sulie's just raised both so situations where in some contexts, lots of ethics conversation, in other contexts, minimal, and brings in the notion of advocacy. I think Madison hit on this sort of at least in the background with some considerations of social justice and what folks in communication are thinking through, or the labor challenges as well. So Sulie, yeah, hey, you know me, I'm all for more ethics courses across all the disciplines.
It's from Expo last year.
Yeah. We're building on the wonderful session.
You are the one started last year. We have the outside speaker talk about ethics. Remember?
Yes.
And yeah. So I appreciate Dean Buschman is here, and I hope he hear me.
We have a wonderful set of folks.
And about that, this is the responsible content research training among magnetic Hall only molecular bioscience program is required. And then now the faculty teaching this course even didn't have, she herself even didn't have training. So it's pretty serious.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think, are great opportunities. And for those who hadn't made it to the session last year, we have recorded it and we can send that out on the website, which featured two excellent research ethicists, Professors Anna Iltis and Rachel Annunziato. So I want to make sure that we sort of round out Madison's questions. So we have the full spectrum of views. LaMar, Madison sort of pushed on us. What do people in your discipline, how often are they talking about ethics? You laid out really well the challenges of moral distress facing OTs, especially given potential values divergence and just other obstacles. Do OTs get together to talk about ethical concerns? How does this happen?
Well, they do talk about it, but I don't think we formally talk about it in like an ethical conversation where people are more so talking about their distress and not really looking at it systematically to define where are the stressors coming from. But what I do see, which is kind of encouraging, is that more and more when I'm reading from some of the newer and the younger practitioners, they are linking it to the systemic problems. So they're saying it's not that we don't love OT and we don't love the value that we bring to the population. It's that we feel constricted and conflicted by the systems that are challenging us from doing the kind of work we would like to do. So there's a whole conversation that's going on within OT right now about where do we fit in terms of what our model is, because we're confined by working in a health model that is not necessarily health related, where we're holistic practitioners. So that's all.
Excellent. I mean, wonderfully sort of rich sort of philosophy of health considerations in the background. I mean, we could spend all day, right? What's the relevant model? Is it appropriate? And what are the sort of challenges of each? So that's we could talk all day. We only have so much time. So what I want to do now is remind folks, if they have questions, please feel free to throw the questions in the chat. But we're going to start moving to, if we don't have any more at the moment, we're going to start moving to sort of what's the big takeaway for everyone. So I want to turn first to Madison. Big takeaway for students, for faculty, colleagues. Take a couple minutes. Let us know what should people who show up and are interested in these kinds of questions, especially what the communication field can bring. Give us a takeaway.
It wouldn't be fair for me not to answer my own question, which is I don't think that we are doing a great job of engaging with one another about ethical dilemmas in communication. So I posed the question because I was really curious, and I think my takeaway will also be connected to what I want to offer. And I think about, our disciplines as organizations, so organizational ethics. So I think the big takeaway is ultimately that we all need to be engaging in ethical conversations, because ultimately we lose people because of the mental health problems that are resulting from encountering ethical dilemmas that they don't know how or what to do with them, and then they don't feel like they have anyone they can talk to about it. And so since we're not having conversations about ethics and giving people the space to be able to think with others about what they should do in situations that they're not certain about, I think it's really important to be clear about what ethical engagement can actually look like. So I found an organizational ethics person, Steve May, who does case studies in organizational ethics, and I really loved his offering of ethical engagement, which is to prioritize dialogic communication, transparency, participation, courage, and accountability, and to make sure that in the spaces that we find ourselves in, so our departments, our colleges, that we are going to be talking about ethical issues at work and setting the stage for those to happen. And it's definitely something that I'm going to prioritize in my own college moving forward, because I think it's really important. And so I want to thank you, Bryan, for giving me the opportunity to think about it in this way, because I think it's vital that we're all engaging in ethical, I guess, conversations with our colleagues.
An excellent answer to your own question. I mean, it's always, well, maybe not easier, but it's, the question that's coming. But that, I mean, there's, again, just like with what LaMar offered at the end in moral distress, I mean, there's so much there. And given all your work in health, right? I mean, the health institutions are now considering sort of diffuse responsibility in light of the rollout of AI and a variety of other things. It's less the case now that you see your OT, your physician, and they are responsible. It's a system, right? So thinking through big organizational ethics questions, and I'm not familiar with the work you referenced, but I mean, the general ethical framework points sound exactly right? It's a conversation. You need that dialogical focus. So thank you. That's excellent. I'm going to keep sort of rounding out through our panel, and I'll turn back to Dean Buschman. So John, big takeaway points for students, for colleagues, for just other interested folks in attendance, both if you can, from the library perspective and also the perspective of leading innovation.
So I want to thank Sulie for bringing up, pointing toward my grants role, because of course, that's a very structured set of commitments, and they have to be taken seriously. I'm going to do the same thing that I started out with. I'm going to take a couple of steps up the ladder and sort of look down, look across a broader landscape. And I really follow the historian and author Timothy Snyder, the guy who made such a splash a few years ago when he published that little teeny tiny book called On Tyranny. And he makes the point that when the politics around us are negative, now I'm quoting, professional commitments to just practice become more important. It's hard to subvert the rule of law without lawyers, or to hold show trials without judges. If doctors had accepted the rule of no surgery without consent, if businessmen had endorsed the prohibition of slavery, then the atrocities by which we remember Nazism would have been much more difficult to happen, to carry out. And his point is that the professions themselves, all of them, form one of those famous intermediate barriers between the individual and nodes of power in government and corporations. And I think that that's exactly correct. And in that sense, I would knit together all of the conversations that we're having today, that there is a kind of meta similarity of commitments among the various ethics in the professions, and that I think we lose sight of that at our own peril. You're muted.
I have to do that at least once in every session. So thank you. That was really well put. And now the list of authors and books I have to read, because it's on my list, I haven't gotten there yet, keeps growing. So thank you very much. Sulie, to wrap us up, for students, for faculty, for other colleagues on the line, what's the big takeaway point about ethics and research in the biomedical sciences?
Respect the policy, respect the one being designed. There is time that I'm annoyed with NIH changing policy all the time. But then actually they it's the professional or expert to design certain way that provide biomedical scientists that to follow, then to go. For example, previously I was, before I became the chair of ISUC committee, I was just a little bit annoyed. I always say that when they told me to raise right hand, I wouldn't raise left hand. It's just very passive to say whatever they tell me to do, I do it. But then later on, I become realized that, just as I mentioned, that if the animal was not handled correctly under a control condition, the data wouldn't be right. So I would say that for the biomedical scientist, really study the policy, abide by the policy, and then so it also discussing with you all, I actually give me more confidence that I am right. As the student has every summer has refreshed their responsible conduct research training. And then I'm very stubborn to believe that if they don't finish the training, I wouldn't let them come back to my lab. So I think learning from you all, I'm more confirmed that it's right to do that. And I hope that my colleague in Minority Hall would understand, would respect, because otherwise my students say, why you are so tough on us and not the others. So that's why I'm just in my little INIP laboratory. So my view is this way, unlike Dean Buschman need to take care of whole university.
Thank you, Sulie. Yeah, a really helpful, again, following on some of Madison's comments on ethics and the dialogical approach, the importance of policy, and then, of course, John's, I think, sort of really deep point about the obligations of particular professions and how tyranny and other challenges, things can run amok if folks don't do the kinds of things that they ought to do ethically. So I want to turn to my colleague and friend LaMar Bolden to sort of wrap us up. LaMar, any final takeaways for students, faculty, colleagues, just audience members from the OT perspective on ethics?
Yes. In short, I think our best way forward to manage some of the moral distress experienced by healthcare professionals right now is advocacy. It's going to come in the form of really stepping up to the systems that are in place to help to mitigate and align our values better so that we can diminish some of the moral distress and not have to be challenged so much in terms of our standards of conduct because of that. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, LaMar. Thanks so much to all of our panelists. This is such a busy week and such a busy time in the semester. I'm grateful to all of you for joining me. This has been a terrifically interesting and thought-provoking conversation. I know I'll be up most of the night thinking through the different philosophical conundrums that have been raised. Thanks to the audience for attending, to Chris Petruzio and Mike Subios and their team for setting everything up. It really, I've learned a ton, so thank you all. We're going to close this session, and please, if anyone has additional questions that we didn't get to, feel free to send me an email, brian.pilkington@shu.edu, or you can get us on social media on Instagram and Twitter through SHU Bioethics, at BCP Ethics, at SHU Bioethics, and you can find us and we'll follow up on any questions. Thank you all. Enjoy, and please enjoy the rest of the Petersheim Academic Expo.
Thank you.
Thank you.